Right, let's start. So my talk is called Metrics, KPIs, Measuring Upwards and Managing Success. Something about me. I'm 37. I've been in IT for 20 years or maybe even more, and I've been JavaScript developer for I think 30 years. Then I was team lead for 7 years. Now I'm developer relations specialist, mentor, developer advocate, whatever you call it. So I help my company to work with communities around the world so that communities understand the product better, and I and my company understand the community better, so build a proper bridge between the communities and the product. So I'm sure you've all heard of lines of code metric. It's like ages and ages. It's been done ages and ages ago. It's the most known metric of all times, I think. I've linked a study on history of this metric. There was actually a proper scientific study of the history of it. And as soon as I provide the slides, I will ask Darren to attach the slides to the event page later. You will be able to have a link to have a look at this link as well. So basically, lines of code was widely used in assembler language and in COBOL language, which is like 50 or 60 years ago. It was okay at the time because if you remember or if you saw assembler or COBOL, you might have noticed that only one instruction per one line was possible. So you couldn't have something crazy as I have on the screenshot done. So if you have a look at the screenshot, on the bottom, you see a perfectly valid one-liner for loop in JavaScript, doing console log of I from 0 to 9, and the same, but in 8 lines, the same for loop, but in 8 lines. So if you have a metric in your software development process of lines of code, it can be easily gamed, or people will just use different style of writing code, and this metric will be completely absurd. I'm just using this metric as the very first and most absurd example. Then there are multiple metrics that we all have in our daily software development life. Some might argue that hours of work is not a metric, and yet in many companies there is time tracking. So essentially, if you work less than, let's say, 8 hours a day, you might have a few things to discuss with your manager. Potentially, your manager will come to you and say, why the hell didn't you work 8 hours a day while everyone worked 8 hours a day? What's the problem with these hours of work? Well, there are plenty of evidence. There is plenty of scientific studies proving that different types of work can be done in 8 hours. Let's say I can do coding for 8 hours, but I can't do architecture design for 8 hours a day. My brain will just explode. So if your company uses hours of work as a metric, then you don't cater for different types of work. And so sometimes I'm productive, and I consider myself productive when I've worked only 2 hours a day. The remaining time I was just thinking about it. So if you use this metric, you kind of force or maybe encourage people to either work more hours and burn out, or work more hours. Like there are rumors that in Japan, people work for crazy hours on a daily basis, but are not as productive as some people in other countries. So if you just use this metric, it's going to be absurd too. Then there is a metric, number of bugs for a developer, let's say. So kind of makes sense, right? So if you make lots of bugs, if the code you produce has lots of defects in it, you seem to have some issues and you need to improve on that. But then what happens, pardon me, what happens and what I witnessed during my development times, that people try to add more time to the estimate, let's say, in order to be able to properly, like do way too much testing for the code they produce, just to be safe, not to have more bugs. Sometimes it's more valuable to ship faster and fix some defects later. But if you have these metrics, this metric, this particular one, chances are your developers won't listen to you asking them to produce code faster. So it's kind of absurd too. It kind of provokes negative behavior. Then there might be a metric of number of times a feature returned to development from testing. That's quite an often metric. I saw it a lot. The meaning, the goal, the original goal of it was, again, kind of making sense. Like if you have something, some code given to manual QA engineers to verify the quality, and if they return it back to you multiple times, it should mean that you kind of didn't pay enough attention to the quality of the code. And I've seen how this metric fails people. It's very simple. It gives you lack of transparency, how it works. So basically, developers who don't want to be punished for multiple returns from testing to development, they ask QA engineers to test everything while they're still doing it in development, which might be okay, but might be not. But again, this metric provokes concealing of the information by developers. So they don't want to pass it to QA. They just want to test it right here, right now. So again, this might toggle some unwanted behavior. Then there is a metric, number of commits in a time period. Let's say number of commits per day. Quite reasonable one, you might think. If I commit often, maybe I'm a productive person. But then after all, what happens is that I want to commit as small chunks as possible so that I have 1,000 commits per day. And I might do it even irrationally, knowing that this metric is observed. And again, another metric, provoking unwanted behavior. Then there is one called number of features done in a time period. When I used to work in London in Badoo, a huge dating app, we had this. Every developer was reporting, and this report was cross-checked with Jira. Every developer was reporting how many features a month he or she did. So what happens next? Developers wanted to pick the smallest features possible to make sure that they have as many features per month as possible. And the bigger features, the features which required some research or the features that had some uncertainty in them, they weren't even picked. So I had to ask the guys and girls to actually pick those features, the hanging ones. So again, you see, this metric can provoke unwanted behavior. So instead of doing something which is of essential value for our customers, we were playing with each other, ping pong of features, like who's going to be doing this, who's going to be doing that. Not wanted. Another metric is the number of features done in a time period. Percentage of features done time. If we have estimations in our process, we kind of want developers to estimate better so that they are done, so all the features are done on time. What happens in this scenario? Very simple thing. People will start adding more and more time margins to the estimations, just to be on the safe side, not to be punished for not having enough features done on time. Another unwanted behavior. Similar thing with number of comments in the merge request. The idea is that if there are lots and lots of comments in a merge request, chances are that the developer didn't pay enough attention to write readable code, the code that won't raise any issues or questions among his peers. But again, sometimes developer will they will game this thing by just talking to others before submitting merge requests. Once again, similar to one of the previous metrics, you will have not enough information on what's going on in the system. Another one is code coverage percentage. I've seen startups which didn't have any code coverage at all. And then they introduced this metric. They wanted a very useful thing to happen. They wanted test coverage to grow. They wanted tests to be implemented for the code the developers write. But what happens next? If there is a metric like that, then developers will start adding more and more coverage, especially when they're pressed for time, without proper thought on how to do automated testing. It's like you're pressed for time, you have a few hours left before your deadline, and you need to hit a proper percentage of coverage. What you're going to do, you're going to add a wrong test, a bad test, a test which won't happen. So you're going to be just adding the complexity to the system for no apparent reason, just to satisfy the metric. So I've briefly explained a few metrics I've witnessed, and some of them are quite absurd, even though the original idea was good. But some of them provoke seriously negative group dynamics. I will talk about that a bit later. So, as I say, every metric has consequences. Some of these consequences are very hard to measure and sometimes even impossible. So what happens if we had a metric of number of features per month per developer, and there starts conflicts in the team? So let's say Marie didn't want to take big feature and didn't want to take this big feature, and they started arguing who's going to be doing this big feature. How do you measure team morale? How do you measure the impact on this team morale? It's impossible to measure. So instead of having a team working on something to satisfy the customer, to make the customer happier, you started not a war, but a conflict in the team, and you can't measure these conflicts. It's very hard. You can only try to see if there are conflicts. And what's even worse, that, as I've said, it's not only impacting individuals, but it's also impacting the whole group, the team. In psychology, there is this term, group dynamics, a system of behaviors and psychological processes occurring within a social group. So we want, essentially, our team to assemble in one unit, powerful one, and produce something to satisfy the customer. We don't want conflicts. We don't want competition. We don't want things like that in our team. So we don't want to provoke them. And the effects of these metrics, more and more you introduce them, multiply. So once a few developers had a conflict or a row or something else, you might not notice it, but the effect will multiply whenever they hit another conflict. So balancing out one metric with another doesn't properly work, because you can't predict the outcome, the effects of each individual metric, group dynamics. There is a very interesting and famous McNamara fallacy. There is a post on Forbes saying that according to the US big data, US won the Vietnam War. How was it calculated? Very easily. McNamara, once a chief general of something of the US, he said that if the amount of corpse, the dead soldiers in one country, in one party of a war, is less than in another, then the first party is winning. So the US has had twice less soldiers killed than Vietnam, and yet the US got away from this conflict. So essentially, some people say they lost this conflict. So there is a study linked here as well. What essentially McNamara fallacy is that you measure whatever can be easily measured, the amount of dead bodies. You disregard that which cannot be measured easily. Let's say the impact of the amount of dead bodies on your team morale, on your country atmosphere or morale, or the country economy. Then third, you presume that which cannot be measured easily is not important. You say, I don't care about the team morale. It's all bullshit. I'll just follow the metrics. And then fourth, you presume that which cannot be measured easily does not exist. We are easily blinded by numbers. There is another very interesting thing called Goodhart's law. It states, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So whenever you start measuring lines of code, features, number of features per month, and whenever developers know that you're measuring it, it becomes a target. and it ceases to become a good measure. Why? Very easy. Just because people will start irrationally or rationally game the system. So the metric always becomes a target. Whenever we start a school, we see some pupils get A grades, some pupils get B grades. We start competing. We start competing rationally or irrationally. So the grade of the metric becomes a target. You just can't do anything about it. It's our psychology. And what's next? Then metrics and targets become KPIs. If you remember, if you were a team lead, and if you remember any performance review you did for your colleagues or for your peers, you remember that anyway, it doesn't matter how rational you are, you looked at the amount of lines of code or number of features or any other metric that was shown against the records of the employee. You will always look at the numbers. That's why the reason for that is simple again. Our brain is a very energy efficient system. We don't want to think. Rational thinking takes a huge amount of energy from our brain. So whenever the brain finds a way to skip thinking, it will do it. Kahneman had this Nobel Prize won for particularly this research, the research of fast and slow thinking systems. So we tend to use the fast thinking system, the one that is irrational. And so metrics and KPIs blindfold us. The problem here is that whenever we see, once again, I will repeat, whenever we see numbers, we tend to stick to them. It's very hard for us to avoid seeing them. If the numbers are there, we will see them. Next, I had this example. Once, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I had a team and I was a huge proponent of data-driven approach. I had metrics for pretty much everything. I had metric for time to market, and it was great. I had a metric for a number of features per developer, a metric of a number of issues found on production in the code of each developer, etc., etc. Everything was great. I motivated the team so well that everything was getting better and better. Time to market was, I think, 3 or 4 days from start to production. But then people started leaving. I didn't think about people. I didn't think that they might burn out, that me being so energetic was the only energetic person in the team and everyone else needed rest. So again, I was looking at the numbers. I was feeling that being a manager, was so successful, driving the team towards success. Everything was great, but people left. There is another example. I'm sorry for Russian screenshots, but it's obvious, I think, what's there. There was this product manager of a bank in Russia bragging about changes to the app. She said that in 1 year, they rewritten pretty much everything in the app. And so all the metrics they had were getting better and better. But if you look at the screenshot, the first one, 2019, I was a user of this app. So I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 action buttons on the first screen. Those 6 I was constantly using. Pretty much every single day I was using these buttons. In a year, I had only 3 remaining. So every single metric of the product manager was getting higher, but I left the bank and other people left the bank too. So we can't see the customer happiness, how it increases. We can only talk to the customers. And if we see just the metrics, we are blindfolded. So there is a great scientist, William Edwards Deming. He left the US for Japan and he worked with Toyota and Sony. He is the inventor of the PDCA concept, Plan, Do, Change, Act, the concept which is the root and the core of Scrum and Kanban. He is the inventor and author of Toyota Production System, which is essentially Kanban. He is the author of the Total Quality Management System. It's a huge one, and I strongly suggest you read about it. There is a strong myth that he once said this: you cannot manage what you can't measure. Deming Institute prepared a special post on debunking this myth. He said the opposite, that you shouldn't be just measuring, you should look into unknowns. So here's what he said. He says he has this post on 7 deadly diseases of management. Number 5 is that management by use only of visible figures, metrics or something, with little or no consideration of figures that are known or unknowable. He calls this a disease of a management. So coming back to the banking app example, product manager didn't actually talk to the customers. She was just looking of what was measurable. And she led a huge amount of people leaving this bank. With my team burnout example, I wasn't talking to the guys and girls in the team. I was just looking at the metrics and trying to improve them. So I was prone to this disease as well. Interestingly enough, Deming says that disease number 3 is that the evaluation of performance, merit rating, or annual review. Why so? Because it's a good conclusion from the metrics thing. So whenever you have metrics, you will base your performance reviews on those numbers. You will try to find data proof for your choices and for your decisions. And so he calls it a disease of management. Let me summarize what I've just said. So metrics are always synthetic. We cannot model the teams. We cannot model group dynamics within the team. Psychology only studies it. It doesn't provide any way to quantifiably measure the group dynamics or effects. And we, of course, can't model the world. So whenever we have a metric of, let's say, more users joining the app, it might show completely useless information, because they might join and then leave or whatever, or join and not pay. So metrics hurt by blindfolding us, because we tend to look at what we've got. There is this saying or an anecdote: when a person sees someone digging under the light, the person asks the digger, "What are you doing there?" "I'm trying to find my keys." "But where did you lose them?" "Oh, it's in a different block." "So why are you looking here?" "Because it's brighter here." So we see metrics as the light. We use them irrationally instead of looking in the proper place. And so metrics inevitably become incentives and KPIs. And then what's very important here, that KPIs and incentives hurt by moving team focus or company focus from customer happiness to these numbers, from customers happily saying thank you for your product to, let's say, lines of code or code coverage or things like that. What's next? I touched performance review. Deming touched performance review a lot. So performance reviews for individuals, they're very controversial as well. One thing is that teams produce results, not individuals. So in order for my team to actually make a customer happier, I need my designer, backend developer, front-end developer, system administrator, maybe a database administrator to work together to produce results. And if we have bad group dynamics, they won't work together well. Deming had this famous 95-5 rule. He says that 95% of variation in the performance of a system or organization is caused by the system itself, and only 5% is caused by the people. This means that you might have 5 brightest engineers, top performers, but the system, your processes, your, let's say, approval scenario might slow them down so much that the team of them will work slower than some other team of low performers. And there is a great link here, exercise to illustrate Deming's rule. I will strongly suggest you read it later. It provides visual clue to this. And what's next? So you tend to think, okay, so if we can't measure performance of individuals, if there is no point in doing that. And by the way, if you start measuring performance of individuals, you start the group dynamic called competition. People will start to compete. And when there is competition, there is no team. And so Martin Fowler, quite well-known guy in IT, he says that it's not just is business value hard to measure. There is a time lag too. So maybe you can't measure the productivity of a team until a few years after release of the software they were building. That's a valuable thought too. But then next, maybe it's not even the team which provides the customer results, the results for the customer happiness. Maybe it's the whole company which provides the result for the customer. Will our IT system, IT product work without sales? I doubt. Will it work without accountants? Maybe yes, maybe no. Will it work without lawyers? I doubt, maybe not. So even if we think about managing or reviewing team performance, it's going to be hard. Like, what can we do with just IT team? Not sure what. So what to do? I criticized a huge lot. And there is an interesting concept. There is a concept of theory X and theory Y. Theory X describes people at workplace as not self-motivated, but extrinsically motivated, that they need control, they need micromanagement, they need guidance, they need metrics, etc., etc. And theory Y says that people actually are much better than that. That if you provide them with a proper, sane, useful process, maybe they will self-organize to produce the value. If you give them vision, what the customer wants and what the company wants, maybe they will self-organize. So I suggest you check if your company culture actually meets your, like, if it really is the way you say it is. Because some companies say we hire only high performance, self-motivated, high professional engineers, but then they set them with KPIs. Why? If you hired someone and pay them a fortune for doing their work, why are you trying to control them with KPIs, hurting the team, group morale, etc.? So I would suggest you try moving from control by objectives to providing the vision and transparency. In my experience, I did this change, they call it agile implementation or whatever. I did this change in 4 teams. I never failed. Maybe it's just me. Maybe the subset is statistically small. I'm not sure. I just suggest you try this. Because whenever people have freedom to express their proper knowledge and motivation and everything and provide customer with something that benefits the customer, they are happier. That's my observation. So I think that it's better to focus on the customer value. What we in IT are very disconnected from the results of our work. So I have this lighter. If I work in a manufacturing facility producing lighters, I can touch it. It works. It's great. I can tell my mom, this lighter works. And she will tell me, well, thanks, Vitaly, it's good, yeah. But when I do coding for a manufacturing facility which produces lighters, I never touch the lighter. I never see the result. It's a hard thing. I'm disconnected from the results of my work. And the morale and the motivation can just drop here very easily. And if you make sure that your developers talk to the customers, sit closer to the customers, that they show them the code, the customer runs the code and produces the lighter, then your developer will be happier and the customer will be happier. That's actually small iterations from Agile or PDCA or whatever. Then there is this help employees with processes and impediments. I'll show it in the next slide. And potentially, if you're a team leader or a CTO, maybe you can run an experiment of having no KPIs and performance reviews. I've witnessed many teams, like 20 teams or even more, where performance reviews were installed and implemented to allow for proper pay rises. But then again, whenever someone wanted to leave the company, the company tried to retain the person and just increase the salary. So it seems that performance reviews were installed for some obscure reason. What I do in my company now, we just raise salaries every year, just a tad, 10% or 5% or 7%. And it's much easier. So no one is stressing out. No one is thinking, will my salary raise next year? How will I work? How will I show my performance review to others? What's it going to be? It's much less stressful situation. And again, if you have performance reviews, people will try to make things look nice on performance review. They will try to focus on matching the expected result on the performance review rather than focusing on achieving something for the customer. So helping with impediments. I've seen soccer coaches and football coaches. What they are doing, they're actually watching the team play. They are advising, they're shouting, do this, do that. And in the break between games, they're actually training their developers, their players to play better. So I think that the team lead should observe and help the team remove the impediments and etc. by teaching. What I suggest you do, first you start with retrospectives as in Scrum, so you get people used to a regular inspect and adopt process. And then you move from retrospectives to ad hoc investigations. What it means that if there is some problem, if there is a blocker, if there is something that the developer can't do on his own or her own, she or he might get others to help with this situation. This is a part of Kaizen philosophy, the constant improvement, where whenever you see a blocker, you stop, you improve. There are two approaches here. You might start with statistically significant blockers. Let's say our infrastructure for automated testing is not good. It makes some tests flaky. Is it statistically significant? Are all the tests flaky or just some tests flaky? Should we prioritize this before some other product development? Not sure. It's up to you and your context. You need to understand and decide what to do. But I think that if you can improve your process and teach developers all the time, it's just better. But then the last and the hardest thing is how to influence others. So if I am just a developer, what can I do? I'm not sure. Seriously, I have no proper answer. If you're a team lead, you follow the rule that put your oxygen mask on you first before assisting others. So you study Deming, Akov, Schultz. I'll give the links to the books. You present the managers with these books. You try to change your team. You become an umbrella for everything from the top, so nothing hits your team. And you run this experiment having no KPIs, having no objectives, having no performance reviews in your team. I once did it quietly. I once did it with one team where we agreed with the team that everyone will meets expectations. There are grades in performance reviews usually, like below expectations, meets expectations, exceeds expectations, strongly exceeds, excellent. Quite popular grades in performance reviews. So I agreed with the team that we will lower the stress of performance reviews. We will not show anything. We will just agree to meet the expectations. And it was a huge success. The team said that the morale was much higher. No one cared what would happen on the performance review. Everyone knew that KPIs weren't in power anymore. So I would suggest you try to change your company or leave. Thank you. Right. How did it go, guys, girls? Thank you, thank you, thank you for reactions. Cool. I'm happy. Does anyone want to jump in and ask questions or say something?
Well, it was really great for me. Can you hear me?
Thank you. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'm Mustafa Mansoor from Bangladesh.
Hmm.
I'm also leading a small team
Nice.
where we're actually we're actually trying to implement KPI system.
Hmm.
But yeah, after hearing from you, uh,
Hmm.
um, yeah, I need to think more about that.
Thank you. That's good.
So yeah, you
I
said
showed.
what you said. Yeah, go ahead.
I actually on the last slide there is my GitHub and there is my Telegram and email. So if you have like if you wish to have a session with me, I can always give a call to you. We can Zoom or whatever, and I can help you with what you're doing if you wish.
That would be really great, really great.
Hmm.
Yeah, I
Cool. I'll
definitely
just
would like to book a slot with you,
cool.
uh, maybe with my team as well.
Perfect. Just perfect. I will help,
Yep,
of course.
yep. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and listening. Yeah, Xavier. Yeah. Hello. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
It
Yeah.
took me a minute to find the unmute button.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, well, thank you for this presentation. This was very thoughtful, and I think there's a lot of good content here to reflect on. So my question is, um, as you iterate on your processes and, try to transform your team into
Mhm.
a highly effective team. I mean, the team itself has goals that, it
Yeah.
seeks to accomplish. How do you measure progress towards those goals if not for KPIs? And I don't mean by
Um,
evaluation, but just to so the team is
mhm.
aware of how they are progressing.
Um, Thank you for your question. It's a very good one. What I do, I usually have a monthly kind of investigation or a retro, whatever you call it. So I sit with the guys and girls and I try to find the blockers that we used to find before. So if we still had them, we need to get rid of them. If we don't have any problems, I don't think that there is like that we always must grow if the team performs well. Like if you have a fire brigade, let's say, they don't want to mm, run twice faster. They only want to run to a certain speed, right? They don't train to run faster and faster. They train to be good fire brigade, to be a good fire brigade. What I want to say here is that it's not a requirement to increase speed. It's a requirement to provide better value for the customer. So whenever team whenever the team is operating at a good speed, I would rather focus on talking more to the customer or doing A/B tests or doing something else or doing, I don't know, proof of concepts with the customer. So I would focus on the value for the customer rather than on the speed.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. John asks a question in the chat. Is there a place for KPI? There seems to be so much study behind it. So should it just be discounted? I'm happy to see that more and more companies discount KPIs. And there is a great company, ThoughtWorks. They are thought leaders or think tank or whatever you call it. They sit in the US and they think a lot about software development. So they also do trainings. And as they do trainings, they have sales team. So a few years ago, they ditched KPIs even for salespersons. And before that, I've never ever heard a company which wouldn't have KPIs for sales guys and girls. But they ditched it, and they're saying it's a huge success for them. So I would say that KPIs are good when you have a production line. When you have like a conveyor of manufacturing, there you see constant improvement and you can measure it. With intellectual labor, it's very hard. I can't, I had this advertisement of a shampoo on the telly, and it said that my hair becomes 32% better. How did they actually measure that? Just impossible. So here's the same thing in IT, in intellectual labor. We cannot measure properly if our customer is 32% happier, but we can try to conquer new markets. We can try to find new customers. We can try talking more to our customers, something like that. So I would say that I would be happy to see KPI ditched altogether. But on the other side, there is a great problem with big companies, corporations. I think Amazon, Microsoft, and pretty much every single corporation have some sort of KPIs. I doubt they can ditch it. In huge corporations, there should be, I think, some way of connecting teams, on making sure that teams perform at a certain level. I'm not serious. I'm not sure how it's going to work without KPIs in big corporations. Flavia says, thank you, Vitaly. Thank you. Namrata, any good books you would recommend for the concepts you just explained? Yes, I will recommend. I will ask Darren to put them on the page. And there is also a link to my on GitHub right on the page. And there are some books there. Hold on a second. I will just point you to them. MISC books. Here it is. Here it is. Andy, thanks, Andy. Good luck to you. Brian, thank you. What do you think about OKRs, the personal performance metrics? I have them for my own. It's not even OKRs. I tell myself, Vitaly, you need to learn this, and that, because your career needs to progress in the following direction. And I show it to my manager, and he says, well, okay, fine. The difference between OKR and KPI is always from top to bottom. So it's a manager, a very smart manager, in like we think he's smart, telling us we need to have more lines of code or more features per month or something else. OKR, on the opposite, should be from the bottom to the top. So I tell my manager, hey, mate, I know that we have this goal for the company. We need to go, let's say, to the Polish market or to the Hungarian market. All right, here's what I'm going to do. It's not that I am obliged to hit those metrics. It's that I intend to have them. So I want, let's say I'm a developer advocate. I want to have more talks. I want to host more talks. I want to give more presentations, etc., etc. I just align the focus, the path with my manager, and that's it. And not in any case I am obliged to hit the metrics there.
So whatever the speed of your production, I mean, you have a competitor in market and you need to ship fast. So what you're saying, what I'm thinking is that KPI is making them slow, right? Then uh, how to
It's
increase the pace? Actually, I want to be a pioneer in the market.
But if you are a pioneer in the market, you are the first one. So if you're saying that there is a competitor, you need to find some unique selling proposition for the market.
Mhm.
It's, let's say, I don't know, Zoom's unique selling proposition was an affordable way to have video conversations for everyone.
Mhm.
So Zoom excelled in this. Instead of just copying everyone else's systems. So
Mhm.
the focus should be, I think, that's my point of view. The focus should be not on speed of copying, but on finding something which is of essential to value to the customers.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Mihir is asking a good question. Sorry, just one second. How to retain better performing team members. That's the thing that I tried to cover in my slide. This one. Hold on a second. Deming said that, and I checked it many, many times, it's true, that 95% of variation in the performance of a system is caused by the system. So whenever you have someone whom you consider a high performer, you might have even less team performance with this guy doing a lot. It's like, consider an analogy. There is a road and you have 5 cars with some goods to be transferred from one place to another. It doesn't matter how fast one car goes. It matters that all of them will be transferring goods to the point B. So what I would suggest you do, instead of trying to measure performing team members or not performing team members, I would suggest that you find those who can teach others. So if you find someone to be really capable in your team, ask that person to teach and mentor and guide those who are slower. That will not toggle the competition in the team, but that will toggle proper mentoring culture, which will allow everyone to become much faster. Namrata, yes, I will share the presentation. Thank you. And please don't hesitate to drop me an email if you want something, if you need something, if you need advice or counseling session. I do them for free. It's all right. So I've sent my email to the chat. Email me if you want. I will also share the slides and the links, and the link to my GitHub I've also put in the chat. So feel free to star or subscribe or whatever.